Hello, friends. Welcome back to Align Vitality. I'm so glad you're here today. And I want to start the episode with a confession. There have been many seasons in my leadership journey, not necessarily at the beginning when everything was new and I expected to feel uncertain, but very well into it, years in, when by every external measure I was doing fairly well, and yet I was profoundly, quietly, unexpectedly very lonely. Not the kind of lonely that comes from having no one around. I've had people around constantly, a team, colleagues, patients, family, a full calendar, and a very full life. But there was something about the leadership role itself, something about the specific weight of leadership that created a kind of distance that I didn't always have language for. A gap between me and the people around me that the role itself seemed to create and maintain. I couldn't always say what I was really thinking. I couldn't always share what I was carrying. I couldn't always let people see the uncertainty because uncertainty in a leader, I had learned, has consequences. And so I carried things alone. I smiled when maybe I wasn't okay. I projected confidence when I was genuinely unsure. Held space for everyone else's hard moments while quietly wondering who was going to hold space for mine. And the thing that made it most disorienting was that nobody had really warned me. No one had said, oh, by the way, this role or these roles are going to be lonelier than you expect. And that loneliness is going to catch you off guard. So I thought something was wrong with me. I thought I was doing it wrong. I thought if I were a better leader, more confident, more capable, more faithful, more something, I wouldn't feel this way. And it took me many years to understand that the loneliness wasn't evidence of my failure. It was really just the weight of the chair. And today I want to talk about that. Not to fix it in 30 minutes because it doesn't work that way, but to name it, to normalize it, to sit with you in it for a while. Because if you are a leader and if you've felt this very specific, sometimes confusing, hard to name loneliness, I want you to know that you are not alone in your aloneness. Do you want to recharge your energy, restore your mental clarity, and finally feel like yourself again? Well, you are in the right place. Welcome to Align Vitality, the podcast that offers faith and functional health strategies for high-achieving, health-conscious women in midlife who want to heal from chronic stress, body and spirit. I'm your host, Tanya Engesether, a certified functional health practitioner, Christian life coach, and fellow midlife woman who knows what it's like to look strong on the outside while struggling silently on the inside. Here, we get real about anxiety, brain fog, burnout, hormone shifts, and the hidden toll of chronic stress. And more importantly, we talk about the path to healing. Each week, you'll find practical strategies and faith-fueled encouragement to help you restore your God-given energy, calm your nervous system, and reclaim peace in this season of life. If you're ready to stop pushing through and start thriving in the abundant life you were created for, let's get after it. This is Align Vitality. Let me start by naming something that I think gets missed in most leadership conversations. Leadership loneliness is not the same as ordinary loneliness. Ordinary loneliness is the loneliness of not having enough connection, not enough people, not enough community, not enough belonging. Leadership loneliness is something a bit different. It is the loneliness that exists inside connection, inside community, inside a full calendar and a full team and a full life. It is the experience of being surrounded and yet somehow separate. And it has some very specific characteristics that I want to walk through because I think naming them is really one step toward not feeling so crazy about them. It is the loneliness of the boundary that the role requires. When you're in a leadership position, whether that is a clinical director, a department head, a ministry leader, a team manager, a business owner. There are things you know that others don't. Decisions being made that you can't discuss. Concerns you're holding that are not yours to share yet. A view of the full picture that comes with your seat and that separates you inevitably from people who are only able to see part of it. And that information asymmetry creates distance. And that distance can feel like loneliness even when the relationship itself is genuine and warm. Leadership loneliness is the loneliness of not being able to be fully known. This one is subtle but significant. Leadership requires a kind of self-management that ordinary relationships don't. You calibrate how you present yourself. You consider the impact of your words on your team's morale, on the organizational culture, on the people who are looking to you to set the tone. Which means there is often a version of you that shows up in leadership spaces, capable, composed, directional, and there's a private version of you that is uncertain, tired, wrestling, and human in all the ways that you cannot always afford to show. And living in that gap between the public self and the private one can be really exhausting and really lonely. Leadership loneliness is the loneliness of the decisions that only you can make. There are moments in leadership when you are the person, the one who has to decide, the one who has to hold firm, the one who has to deliver the news, initiate the hard conversation, make the call that affects people you genuinely care about. And in those moments, even when you have good advisors, good counsel, even when you have prayed and processed, there's a final solitary step that only you can take. And that moment is lonely in a specific kind of way. And when you take it and you live with the consequences and you hold whatever follows, you often hold that alone too. It's the loneliness of being the one who's not allowed to fall apart. And that one, I can tell you I haven't been 100% successful at least not in the quiet spaces, but this one lands hard for a lot of women leaders, especially women who care deeply about the people they lead. You tend to become the container for everyone else's anxiety, their fears about change, their frustrations with each other, their frustrations with you, their grief over losses, their stress about the work. They bring it to you because you are the leader, because you are steady, because you can hold it, and you do. But what you're not always sure of is where you're supposed to put it afterward. Now, I want to spend a moment on why this loneliness is so disorienting sometimes, because I think understanding the why helps us be more compassionate with ourselves when we do feel it. The reason leadership loneliness catches us off guard is that it contradicts everything we were told leadership would be. We were told leadership was about influence, connection, building something with people, being part of something larger than yourself, and all of that is true. But what the books don't tell you, what the leadership development programs don't cover in nearly enough depth, is that the same role that gives you influence and connection also creates a specific kind of separation that is inherent to the position itself. The authority that comes with the role changes the relationship, whether you want it to or not. People relate to you differently when you have the title, which means that even in genuine, warm, collegial relationships, there's often a layer of performance on their end and a layer of guardedness on yours that did not exist before you had the role. And for women who are deeply relational by nature, who went into leadership in part because they cared about people, who measure their own well-being in large part by the quality of their connections, that shift can be genuinely disorienting and genuinely painful. Because you did not expect the role you love to cost you the very thing that gives you life. But for a lot of us, it does, at least in part. And carrying that cost quietly without naming it, without tending to it without understanding it as a real and legitimate experience rather than a personal failing is one of the things that drives the depletion that we've been talking about in the previous series. Because the leader who is lonely but cannot say so is often the leader who compensates by working harder, by being more available, by trying to earn back the connection that the role has made complicated, which is its own kind of people-pleasing and its own kind of exhaustion. Now, I want to take you to a story in Scripture that I find profoundly comforting in this conversation, and it is the story of Elijah. We've talked about this one before. It starts in 1 Kings chapter 19. And if you're not familiar with the context, Elijah has just come off one of the most dramatic victories in the Old Testament. He's confronted the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. He has called down fire from heaven, and God showed up in a spectacular and unmistakable way. It was a defining moment of faith and courage. And then, in the very next chapter, Elijah is under a juniper tree, alone, asking God to let him die, saying, "I have had enough, Lord, take my life." This is the prophet, the one who just watched God move in an extraordinary way, the one who has been faithful, courageous, obedient to an almost unimaginable degree. And he is alone under a tree, depleted beyond what he can bear, convinced that he's the only one left who cares about what God cares about, saying, "I am the only one left." That is leadership loneliness at its most acute. That sense that no one fully understands, that you're carrying something that no one else is willing to carry, that the weight of what you're responsible for has become more than you can hold. And what I really want you to notice is what God does in response. He does not rebuke Elijah. He does not question his faith. He does not give him a strategy or a 10-step plan for getting back on his feet. First, he lets him sleep, and then he feeds him, saying, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." Twice, he does it twice. Rest, food, gentle presence, a touch, and then eventually when Elijah is ready, a conversation. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Not an accusation, an invitation to speak. And God's final word is this: "I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal." In other words, you're not the only one. You're not as alone as you feel. There are more who understand than you currently know. I think that passage is so tender because God doesn't treat Elijah's loneliness and exhaustion as a spiritual failure. He treats it as a human reality that deserves a human response. Rest, nourishment, presence, and then gently, perspective. That's the God who's with you in the weight of the chair, your leadership chair. Now, I want to bring a bit of my functional health lens into the conversation because leadership loneliness is not just an emotional experience. It has a physiological signature that I think is important for you to understand. Research on loneliness and social isolation has found that chronic loneliness activates the same threat response in the body as physical danger does. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis that we've talked about, the HPA axis, we've talked about that extensively in previous series, fires in response to social disconnection the same way that it fires in response to a physical threat, which means that the leader who is chronically lonely is also chronically stressed at a physiological level, even if everything in her external life looks fine. Excuse me. And sustained HPA axis activation from chronic loneliness contributes to elevated cortisol, which over time disrupts sleep, destabilizes blood sugar, and drives the hormonal cascade that we've talked about in the Dying to Please series. Chronic loneliness and chronic stress contributes to inflammation. Chronic loneliness is associated with elevated inflammatory markers, which drive a wide range of health consequences over time. Then there's immune dysregulation. Isolated individuals show measurably different immune function than those with strong social connection. Disrupted sleep. The lonely brain is more vigilant than the socially connected brain. It scans for threat more actively, which makes deep restorative sleep more difficult to achieve. Mood disruption. The neurotransmitter depletion that comes with chronic stress is amplified by loneliness, which affects serotonin and dopamine in ways that compound anxiety and low mood. And the body doesn't care that you are intellectually okay with the loneliness. You can understand it, you can frame it physiologically, you can tell yourself it's part of the role and it's fine, and your HPA axis will still fire because the body responds to what it experiences, not to what you decide to think about what it experiences. This is why the strategies I'm going to share in this series are not just emotional or spiritual strategies, they are physiological. They are choices that speak directly to the nervous system, that communicate safety, connection, and regulation to a body that has been running on the fuel of isolation. So now I want to be a little practical, because I promised you that this series would include my personal strategies, not theory, not best practices that I read in a book, but what I have actually learned to do in the seasons when the loneliness of leadership has hit hard for me. So one of the first things I do is I name it to myself, to God, and if possible, to at least one safe person. It sounds simple, but it's not. The reflex of many of us leaders is to manage the feeling rather than name it, to get busy, to redirect ourselves, to find something productive to do with the discomfort. What I've learned is that naming it is the most important first step. Saying out loud, even just in a journal, in prayer, or to another trusted person, I'm lonely right now. This is harder than I expected. I'm carrying more than I have words for. This begins to discharge some of the physiological weight of the experience. There's actually research behind this. Affect labeling, the act of naming an emotional experience, activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces activity in the amygdala. So in plain language, naming what you feel literally calms the threat response in the brain. So say the thing, even if only to God. And honestly, that's the most important place to go with it. Another thing I do is I go back to this story in 1 Kings chapter 19. I sit with the image of Elijah under the juniper tree. I let myself be in that story. Not as a spiritual exercise to try to fix myself, but as a reminder that the God who met a depleted, lonely, I've had enough Elijah under a tree is the same God who is with me in the specific hard moments I'm sitting in. Another really important thing I do, and I have to be very intentional about these things I'm telling you. I'm going to just be honest. My natural reaction is to want to isolate myself further. That's what happens when I feel anxious, when I feel lonely. My natural reaction is to do the opposite of all these things that I'm telling you. But that natural reaction is not what works. It only prolongs and delays the recovery. So first I said I name it. Second, I go back to this story in 1 Kings. Third, I do something physical, not as a distraction, but as regulation. When the loneliness gets heavy, when the weight of the chair is most acute, I have learned that I need to get into my body. A walk outside, preferably without the distraction of headphones. Movement that is slow and present enough to actually inhabit rather than escape, because the loneliness lives in the body and the body heals in the body. A walk in fresh air, a few deep breaths, attention paid to what I can see and hear and feel in God's creation. These are not small things. They are nervous system interventions. They are the rest and the food that God gave Elijah before he gave him anything else. A fourth thing that I do is I invest in peer relationships with intentionality. One of the most clinically and experientially true things I know about leadership loneliness is this: you cannot address it with the people that you lead. That relationship dynamic is too layered. The role creates too much of the very separation that is causing the loneliness. What heals leadership loneliness is peer connection. So relationships with people who understand the weight of the chair from their own experience, other leaders, other women that are navigating the same terrain. I've had to be very intentional about cultivating those relationships because they don't develop as naturally as the peer relationships did earlier in life. They require intentionality and pursuit. They require vulnerability. They require the willingness to say that I need this in a culture that often rewards leaders for not needing anything. But trust me, it's worth it every single time. And finally, and most importantly, I bring it to God very specifically rather than generally. Now, there's a difference between general prayer, like, God, please be with me, please help me, and a specific prayer. Specific prayer sounds like, God, I'm sitting with the loneliness of a decision I cannot share with anyone. I'm carrying the weight of what I know and cannot say. I'm tired of being strong in rooms where I'm not sure that I'm okay. Come into this specifically. Be with me in this particular kind of aloneness. The specificity matters not because God needs the detail, but because we do. Naming it specifically in prayer is another form of affect labeling. It brings that prefrontal cortex back online. It moves the experience from vague, ambient dread into something that can be held and addressed and answered. And it opens the door for the kind of divine presence that Elijah received. Not necessarily a specific answer or strategy, but a you are not alone and I see exactly what you're carrying kind of response. I'm not going to wrap this up neatly today because leadership loneliness is not a neat experience. It does not resolve cleanly. It is not a problem to be solved so much as a reality to be aware of and tended to again and again in different seasons and different forms, probably for as long as you lead. But here's what I'd like you to take from today. The loneliness you feel is not evidence that you're doing it wrong. It is evidence that you're carrying something real, something heavy, something that deserves to be tended rather than pushed through. You're not the only leader who has felt this way. You're not broken, you're not faithless, and you're not weak. You are human, and you are in a role that asks a great deal of your humanity. Elijah was under the juniper tree alone, and God showed up, not with a rebuke, not with a strategy, with rest and food and the words, the journey is too much for you. Let that be enough for today. Next week, we're going to talk about the anxiety that comes with leadership. And let's close together with a prayer. God, we come to you today from a variety of chairs. Some of us are in leadership roles that are stretching us in ways we did not fully anticipate. Some of us are in seasons of genuine isolation, carrying things we cannot share, holding things we cannot put down, wondering when we became so tired. We confess that we have not always named this, that we've pushed through rather than paused or sought you, that we've kept going rather than sitting, even briefly, under the juniper tree. Meet us here today, the way you met Elijah, with rest and presence and the quiet reminder that we're not as alone as we feel. Remind us that you, the same God who called us to this role, is the same God who is with us in the weight of it. Give us the courage to name what we're carrying. Give us the wisdom to tend to ourselves the way we tend to everyone else. And give us at least one person, one safe, understanding, been there voice to walk alongside us. We trust you with this, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for joining me here today, my friends. The weight of the chair of leadership is real, and you don't have to carry it alone. Until next time, lead well, live well, and be well. Thank you so much for joining me today, my friend. If today's episode encouraged or blessed you, would you please take a minute to leave a rating and written review on Apple Podcast? It means the world to me, and it helps more women like you discover this message of hope and healing. If you're ready to take the next step in your functional health journey, join my interest list at alignvitalityhealth.com. And remember, this podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to be medical advice, nor is it intended to diagnose or treat disease. Please consult your healthcare provider before making changes to your health. Until next time, I'm Tanya Engesether, reminding you that healing is possible and your best season is still ahead.